Hi guys, welcome to part 4 of Mildly Interested. We're up to chapter 1. Everyone is around the watering hole of the office. George leans on the wall with his shirt half out and his tie way too short. Mary stands meekly holding her plastic cup of water, trying to get away from George's unflattering stance and choice words of wisdom for the day. Little Benny, who hasn't been doing much all day, you can tell because he's all cheerful as if he just walked in the door. He's about to pick up a plastic beverage container when Julie swarms in and grabs the last cup. She raises her eyebrow to say sorry and to convey some amount of regret at taking the last cup, but obviously not enough to stop. She takes a gulp, her Adam's apple remarkably evident for a woman, her dress shockingly short. Little Benny licks his lips at the thought of the fresh cold water and can't help but notice the shiny bit of skin above her knee. He is aroused, and it's been quite a while, but they don't call him Little Benny for nothing. Julie notes the triumphant admiration, feeling a tad overconfident. Lester Kelfort never approached the cooler when so many hovered around its circumference. He preferred to take his liquid alone, but that wasn't going to happen. They lingered as if it was a pub. Fuck off, he thought to himself. Lester didn't have time for this office showdown, so he leaned a little while longer at his doorway, hoping they'd go. At the other end of the orifice were James and Pierce. They sat next to each other like small children at attention, waiting for the teacher to tell them they dressed well today. James's hair was purposefully wet and combed, sort of a lick of the cow kind of do. He still wore his jacket at his desk, and his tie was perfectly aligned. Pierce, not quite as dapper, with his white shirt, red tie slightly loosened, and top button undone, was by far the craftiest one of them both. His smug smile and naturally falling hair showed a man of seemingly carefree potential, yet fixated on technology and ways to download free shit whenever he could. Outside one of the windows of the office was a tree. Actually, there were no windows per se, just a big pane of glass that stretched from one side to the other. Quite a distance, in fact it was 17.5 metres. There weren't windows anymore. In fact, offices like these didn't let air or wind or anything natural in. A window is not just to let light in and for people to see out, and layabouts to look in. A window is for ventilation, for light, for aesthetics, and to admire the neat little picture of the tree outside, neatly framed. But on this occasion, one had to think about the framing in an abstract manner. So the tree, it was huge. The trunk was 4 people thick and had lumps on it at odd places. The bark was shiny almost, and the roots spread like venom into the surrounding ground that was covered by the slowly decaying reddish leaves. The branches stretched for 10 metres either side, the height equaling the top of the building. The thing is, Paddy Smith, who frequented the lavatory far too many times for the size of her bowels, was at it again. She tinkled her urine into the ceramic bowl with just that little bit of sound that let anyone else know someone was in the stall. Her arms scrunched to her side and cheeks made a mad dash to her forehead to let more out. But nothing. Paddy was destined to return in another 20 minutes. Well, when Paddy was returning from the pisser, past the water dispenser, she nearly tripped over Lester Calfort, who had taken his place by the cooler like how he'd liked. The others had gone back to their hobbit holes to pretend to do something, while Lester dwelled in the moment of silence until, that is, Paddy came tumbling around the corner, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. She said sorry, looking down as if she'd done something very bad. Lester nodded and thought that he wouldn't have minded so much if she had bumped into him. She was one of the only people in the office he could tolerate for more than 17 seconds. He refilled the plastic cup and headed back to his office and closed the door abruptly behind him. The sign on the door said, "Mildly Interested." Chapter 2. A small boy, probably about the age of a shin kicker, was sitting at the bottom of the tree with his legs stretched out and his arm resting on one of the roots. He didn't wear any uniform, but he did have a haircut that told of either army, boarding school, or a bored parent armed with a plastic Tupperware bowl. George, who was still being a pain, but this time at the pain, looked out at the strangely placed sub-teenage creature. He wondered in his own undiligent way to whom he belonged and why he was leaning on a tree in the middle of the morning on a school day. He didn't have any answers and wasn't offering any to anybody anywho. He tapped on the glass with his fist. The boy didn't hear anything. The glass was too thick. George didn't realise this, as he wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. He turned to anybody that was dumb enough to be in his vicinity and asked if he should go out and check on the Pimple farm. Pierce was standing nearest, retrieving some printouts from the machine. He was bent down with the drawer open, trying to fix a paper jam, when he overheard George talking to himself and then realised he might be talking to him. Closing the door, he kicked the bottom of the Ricoh 1700, cursed the gods, and went back to stand next to the disconcerting George. Pierce asked him who it was and why they were presently both looking at a kid in the park. George snickered at how that sounded, and he said he was starting to get concerned for his well-being. In their finite wisdom, they both agreed that perhaps not seeing any parent around, it might be a good idea to check on him. Pierce let the receptionist know that they were going just in case something happened. "We won't be long," George said as he cupped his right testicle with his left hand. The secretary was cooped up in a tiny wooden cubicle that looked like a reused 1970s bar, discovered at a makeshift Elvis concert in the back of someone's garage. She tried to peek over the laminate at Pierce's bottom, but it wasn't within her sight. Even when she got on her tippy toes, she sat down and continued to flick the pages of Cosmopolitan. She wasn't a big reader. In fact, Mills and Boone romance was as daring as she got these days. Her nails were red, hair tightly curled, and breasts pouty but kept in line. The team of two headed into the faux marble foyer with its token green plant and purple sofa. The glass automatic doors slid open as they entered the atmosphere of the outer world. Often, people were not known for their ability to adjust to fresh air and sunshine. George instantly developed wet underarms from perspiration normally reserved for a fit woman's road race. Pierce pulled out a pack of Marlboro, inched a cigarette out and lit up. Fresh air, he thought to himself. The boy was still silent, but he'd changed positions. Now he was sitting cross-legged and fiddling with a piece of branch. The guy stood next to him about 5 feet away, just to be on the safe side. They didn't want a 7-foot halfback come out of nowhere and tackle him into the ground. They asked if he was a terrorist. Taking it some way, he turned his head and asked if they were poofters, and if they had come to touch him. George looked to Pierce for support as he laughed in embarrassment, actually feeling a little caught out. He'd had gay thoughts about Pierce, but how did the kid know? Pierce blew smoke, paused, and asked the twerp if he was a gaylord. The kid said he couldn't say that to a kid in the park and that he'd tell someone. Pierce told him that he couldn't give a shit what he told anyone. The boy didn't know what to say, so he just returned to playing with his branch, poking it into the dirt. George tried again by asking if he was okay. He said that the people in that office, as he motioned towards the darkened pane of glass, were worried about him and why he was sitting in a park by himself at this time. Trey said that he was okay. He said that, in fact, he was beyond okay, but his dad, on the other hand, wasn't having such a good day. They asked what he meant by that, and Trey replied that he woke up in the morning, got ready for school, and his father was cold. George said that sometimes adults are just like that. Trey said that what he meant was that he had died sometime during the night, and his body was stone cold. He then decided to walk to clear his head. Pierce asked if he'd told anyone, especially his mother. He answered that his mother, a crack whore, had left him when he was only 3 because she couldn't cope, or maybe she didn't like snotty-nosed kids. He started to cry at the mention of his mother because he hadn't seen or heard from her for 7 years. "So you're 10, huh?" Pierce confirmed. He went back to the branch wielding and wiped his eyes with his shirt. George looked into the pane of glass, knowing the rest of the office dwellers would be looking on, wondering why they were making a 10-year-old cry. He shrugged his shoulders, just with his open hands, that he didn't have a clue. They knew that anyway. "So, kid, your dad's a bit the dust, your mum's a crack whore, and you're only 10. So what are you going to do then?" Pierce asked him, trying to help him to feel better, or at least look ahead. He said that he didn't know, but that he was thinking of visiting his friend. They asked where his friend lived, and should they call the police to take him there. He said that wouldn't be necessary because his friend Pranda was overseas in India. Right, so is this friend real then? George asked without much diplomacy. Trey replied that Pranda was his sister from Delhi, that his dad had given her to him when he was 3. She was a World Vision child that they had supported, and Kelvin, his dad, told him that he'd be able to visit her one day and that she was his sister and to look after her if anything happened to him. Of course, Kelvin didn't know that he would drop dead in the middle of the night. He really should have been dead a long time ago before that, according to the doctors, but Trey must have kept him alive by just being himself. Kids have a way about them. Okay, thanks guys. I'll see you next week for part 5. Ciao.